Mr. Curtis, $183,000, donations meant for the hungry.
I built this organization to feed people, and I gave everything to that mission.
You were the only officer.
To the media, to donors, to the families he claimed to serve, Stanley Curtis was America's most celebrated hunger relief philanthropist. To federal investigators, he was something else entirely.
No one else could check what you did with the money.
I need to speak with my attorney before I say anything.
He would not get the chance to finish that sentence. Within 90 days, federal prosecutors in the Western District of Kentucky would unseal an indictment listing mail fraud, money laundering, and 3 counts of filing false income tax returns. The man celebrated for feeding the hungry had been quietly feeding himself. $183,354 in donations diverted. More than $500,000 in personal income hidden from the IRS. And every dollar of it had been routed through a charity he ran by himself, with no board oversight, no second signature, and no one watching the till but him. Quick question before we go any further. What would you do if you found out your favorite charity, the one you write a check to every November, was run by exactly one person with one signature on every account, and not a single board member checking the books? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now. We cover one of these every single week. The next one is worse than this one. Stanley Curtis was born in Louisville, Kentucky, in the spring of 1942, the second of 3 children in a working-class Catholic family living off Bardstown Road. His father worked the second shift at the Ford assembly plant in the south end of the city. His mother kept the books for neighborhood grocers and barbershops out of the front room of the house, often paid in store credit instead of cash. Money was tight, but never absent. The Curtis household ate 3 meals a day, and the family rule was that nothing left the table uneaten. Stan attended Bishop David High School, graduated in 1960, and enrolled at the University of Louisville on a partial scholarship. He studied marketing and communications and paid his way through, with a job loading freight at the Greyhound terminal on Broadway. Classmates remembered him as relentlessly cheerful, the kind of student who organized canned food drives at Easter without being asked. A 1964 yearbook entry described him as the friend you call first. He graduated that spring, married his college girlfriend Joanne Riley the following summer, and took a junior account position at a downtown Louisville advertising agency for $92 a week. By 1972, he was a senior account executive at the same firm, handling regional campaigns for Brown-Forman, Humana, and a chain of Kentucky furniture stores. He was good at the work, but the work was not what he talked about at dinner. What he talked about was the food pantry at St. Joseph Parish, where he and Joanne volunteered every Saturday morning, sorting donations and packing grocery bags for families who had run out of food stamps before the end of the month. The pantry kept a chalkboard tally on the back wall of the storeroom. By 1985, the tally had crossed 30,000 bags. Stan kept a photograph of that chalkboard in his wallet. In January of 1989, watching Harry Belafonte and Lionel Richie on television singing the second verse of We Are the World for the umpteenth time, Stan Curtis had what he later called the simplest idea of his life. The country was throwing away enough food every day to feed every hungry person 3 times over. Grocery stores were dumping bread. Restaurants were tossing produce. Caterers were burying entire trays of untouched chicken at the end of every wedding. All anyone had to do was pick it up and drop it off. He quit his agency job that March, mortgaged his house on Eastover Court, and incorporated USA Harvest as a 501c3 public charity headquartered at a leased storefront on Frankfort Avenue. The model was disarmingly elegant. USA Harvest would never write a check to a food bank. It would never warehouse a single can of soup. It would only move food. Restaurants and grocers would call a hotline, a volunteer driver would arrive within 90 minutes, and the food would be in the hands of a shelter or a soup kitchen by the end of the same evening. Stan called it the no-cost charity, and he meant it literally. No paid staff, no office overhead, no fundraising galas. Every dollar donated, he told reporters, went straight to the work. Within 4 years, USA Harvest had chapters in 46 American cities. By 1995, the organization claimed to have moved more than 100 million pounds of food to shelters, food pantries, and soup kitchens nationwide. President George H.W. Bush named Stan Curtis the 472nd Daily Point of Light. The Catholic Archdiocese of Louisville gave him its Lay Apostle of the Year award. The Louisville Courier-Journal ran a Sunday profile that called him the conscience of the city. A 1996 evaluation from the organization's accountant described Curtis as tirelessly committed to the mission, with exceptional personal integrity and strong donor instincts. The phone in his Frankfort Avenue office rang constantly. A donor in Cincinnati wanted to wire $15,000 before the end of the quarter. A widow in Lexington wanted to know if her late husband's estate could establish a memorial fund. A grocery chain in Indianapolis wanted to open a chapter. Stan handled every call himself. He answered every donor letter himself. He signed every thank you note himself. The signature was the same on every piece of paper that left the building, because the only person in the building was him. Within a decade, Stanley Curtis was, by acclaim, the most trusted philanthropist in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. That trust was about to be tested. To understand what happened next, you have to understand how USA Harvest actually operated, not the version Stan Curtis sold from the podium, the version that lived on paper. USA Harvest was incorporated in Kentucky as a nonprofit corporation in March of 1989. The articles of incorporation listed Stanley Curtis as president, treasurer, and sole director. The bylaws, filed the same week, granted the president unilateral authority to open and close bank accounts, to accept and disperse all charitable contributions, to sign all checks regardless of amount, and to file all tax returns on behalf of the organization. There was no board of directors with independent members. There were no quarterly financial reviews. There was no second signature requirement on any account. From a legal standpoint, USA Harvest was Stanley Curtis, and Stanley Curtis was USA Harvest. The structure was not, by itself, illegal. Small nonprofits in the early 90s often started this way. Founders incorporated the entity, kept costs low, and added board members later as the operation grew. The Internal Revenue Service required charities to file Form 990 each year, disclosing revenue, expenses, and officer compensation, and the public was theoretically able to inspect those filings. State attorneys general could investigate fraud allegations. Donors could ask questions, but the system relied on a single, fragile assumption. It assumed someone, somewhere, was actually looking. In the case of USA Harvest, no one was. The chapter directors in 46 cities were unpaid volunteers who answered the hotline and dispatched drivers. They never saw a bank statement. The accountant who prepared the Form 990 each year saw only the documents Stan Curtis chose to give him. The donors who wrote checks made them out to USA Harvest and mailed them to a P.O. box in Louisville. From the P.O. box, the checks went to one place. They went to Stan. USA Harvest publicly raised between $400,000 and $700,000 in cash contributions per year through the 1990s. That money flowed through 3 operating accounts at a Louisville savings institution, all of them controlled by a single signatory. Donors trusted Stan because his face was on every appeal letter, every Channel 11 public service announcement, every photo of a turkey drive on the front page of the Courier-Journal. They trusted him because every public statement the organization made for 15 consecutive years repeated the same promise. Every dollar goes to the work. The promise was the product. It was also the cover. The first diversion was small, almost accidental in shape, the kind of thing a man could later explain to himself as a loan. In November of 1994, Stan Curtis wrote a check from a USA Harvest operating account in the amount of $4,200 and used the funds to pay the property tax bill on his home on Eastover Court. The check cleared. The accountant did not flag it. The annual Form 990 listed the disbursement as administrative reimbursement. Nothing happened. In January of 1995, he wrote another check, $6,800, this time for a vacation to Sanibel Island with Joanne and the children. It cleared. Nothing happened. By 1997, the pattern was no longer accidental. Federal prosecutors would later trace a steady monthly cadence. Every fourth or fifth week, a check would leave a USA Harvest account and pay for something that had nothing to do with hunger relief. Country club dues at Audubon, a used Lincoln Town car from a dealership on Shelbyville Road, a leather sectional from a furniture store in St. Matthews, tuition at Sacred Heart Academy for one of the Curtis daughters, cash withdrawals at the teller window, never more than $9,000 at a time, because the bank reported single transactions of $10,000 or more to the Treasury Department. The mechanics never changed. Stan was the only signatory. Stan reconciled the bank statements himself. Stan submitted the supporting documents to the accountant once a year, and the accountant prepared the tax return based on what Stan handed him. There was no one in between. The income side told the second half of the story. Between 1996 and 2002, USA Harvest paid Stanley Curtis a stipend the organization characterized on its public filings as modest reimbursement for travel and lodging. The figure listed on the Form 990 hovered between $14,000 and $20,000 per year. The figure that actually moved from USA Harvest bank accounts to Stan Curtis's personal accounts during that same window was more than $500,000. None of the difference appeared on his personal tax returns. The IRS received no notice of it. The Kentucky Department of Revenue received no notice of it. Joanne, the accountant later testified, received no notice of it either. What Stan Curtis bought with the diverted money was not a yacht. It was not a beach house. It was the kind of middle-class comfort that no one in his Louisville circle would have particularly noticed. A nicer car every 3 years. Private school tuition paid in full. Annual vacations to Florida and to the Outer Banks. A finished basement with a wet bar and a widescreen television. Donations to his parish in his own name rather than the charity's. Tickets in the lower bowl at Freedom Hall for every home Cardinals game. A standing reservation for 2 on the Millionaires Row Terrace at Churchill Downs every first Saturday in May. The escalation was gradual enough to be invisible. In 1994, the diversions totaled less than $10,000. By 1998, they had crossed $25,000. By 2001, they had crossed $40,000. The cumulative figure, the one federal forensic accountants would eventually reconstruct from 15 years of bank records, was $183,354 in straight theft, plus an additional $500,000 in unreported personal income. The two numbers together would form the spine of the federal indictment. Through all of it, Stan Curtis continued to give the same speech. He gave it at the Louisville Rotary Club. He gave it at the Brown Hotel Ballroom. He gave it from the pulpit at St. Joseph Parish on a Sunday morning in 2001, 2 months after diverting $12,000 in donations to pay for a kitchen remodel. The speech ended the same way every time. Every dollar, he told them, goes to the work. No one noticed. No one checked. No one in the donor base, no one at the accounting firm, no one at the IRS reviewing the annual Form 990 with the eye of someone who actually expected fraud. The charity was Stan Curtis. Stan Curtis was the charity. The architecture of the thing required no one to look, and no one did. The unraveling began with a single piece of certified mail in the spring of 2005. A retired hospital administrator named Margaret Whitlow had been donating to USA Harvest for 9 consecutive years. She and her late husband had committed to $1,000 a year, sent each November in time for the Thanksgiving food drive. After her husband's death in 2004, Margaret decided to establish a more substantial gift, a 5-year pledge totaling $50,000 to be paid in annual installments. Her attorney prepared the paperwork and requested a copy of USA Harvest's most recent audited financial statements. There were no audited financial statements. USA Harvest had never been audited. What Margaret Whitlow's attorney received instead was a copy of the most recent Form 990, prepared by a Louisville CPA who had served the organization for more than a decade. The attorney was a careful man named Edmund Rourke. He read the form line by line. He noticed that the organization listed officer compensation of $19,000 for the reporting year, that it claimed 0 paid staff, and that it disclosed total contributions of $612,000. The math did not bother him. The structure did. The form listed one officer. One officer was the president. One officer was the treasurer. One officer was the sole director. The same name appeared in every signature block, on every certifying line, on every disclosure schedule. Rourke had handled estates for 30 years. He had never seen a charity of that size operate with a single fiduciary. He sent a letter to Stan Curtis requesting a list of board members, a copy of the most recent bank reconciliation, and the name of an independent auditor. He marked the letter for return receipt. Stan Curtis received the letter on a Tuesday morning in March of 2005. He signed for it. He read it twice. And then, instead of replying, he did the one thing a man in his position should never have done. He cashed Margaret Whitlow's most recent contribution, a routine annual check of $1,000 that had arrived the previous month, and used the funds to pay a mechanic's bill on his Lincoln. The bank record of that deposit, the endorsement on the back of the check, and the receipt from the mechanic would, 3 years later, be People's Exhibits 17, 18, and 19. Edmund Rourke waited 4 weeks for a response. When none came, he drove to Frankfort and filed a written complaint with the Kentucky Attorney General's Charitable Trust Section. He attached the unanswered letter, the Form 9-90, and a 2-page memorandum laying out his structural concerns. The Charitable Trust Section forwarded the complaint to the Public Integrity Section. The Public Integrity Section forwarded it to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Louisville Field Office. The Louisville Field Office assigned the case to a special agent named Daniel Pruitt. Pruitt had spent 11 years investigating white-collar fraud in Kentucky and southern Indiana. He read the complaint on a Friday afternoon. By the following Monday, he had subpoenaed 3 years of bank records from USA Harvest's accounts at Republic Bank. What he found in those records would take 18 months to fully reconstruct. The first round of subpoenas covered the years 2002 through 2004. Special Agent Pruitt and an IRS criminal investigation forensic accountant named Lillian Bessemer worked the boxes in a windowless room on the 3rd floor of the Federal Building on West Broadway. They started by laying out every deposit, every donor check, every wire transfer, every cash contribution. Then they laid out every withdrawal, every signed check, every debit card transaction, every teller window cash pull. The pattern was visible within 2 days. Donations came in addressed to USA Harvest. Money went out to Audubon Country Club, Heine Brothers Coffee, Sacred Heart Academy, the Lincoln dealership on Shelbyville Road, and a long list of personal vendors that had nothing to do with hunger relief. The teller window cash withdrawals followed a deliberate cadence, always between $7,000 and $9,500, never crossing the federal currency transaction reporting threshold of $10,000. Bessemer counted 43 such withdrawals in the 3-year window. The total came to $312,000 in cash, none of which had been reported on any tax return Stan Curtis had ever filed. The smoking gun, the single piece of evidence that turned a strong case into an unwinnable one, was sitting in the file cabinet behind Stan Curtis's desk the entire time. The agents found it during a search warrant executed at the USA Harvest office on Frankfort Avenue in August of 2006. It was a notebook, a black hardbound ledger of the kind sold at any office supply store. Inside the front cover, in Stan Curtis's own handwriting, were 6 columns: date, amount, source account, personal use, tax treatment, notes. The first entry was dated November of 1994. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before the search warrant. Every diversion was there, every cash withdrawal, every personal expense paid out of a charitable account. In the tax treatment column, the most common notation was a single word, written in lowercase: skip. Pruitt also recovered correspondence, letters between Stan Curtis and his accountant, in which Stan explicitly directed the accountant to characterize personal expenses as charitable disbursements. A 2001 letter contained the sentence, "Please code the Lincoln payment as outreach travel for this filing season. We will straighten it out next year. A 2003 letter said, "Do not include the Sanibel reimbursements in my personal compensation. That is internal only." A 2005 letter, written 3 months after Edmund Rourke's first inquiry, said simply, "We need to keep the $990 the same as last year. No surprises." The accountant, when interviewed, produced his own files. He produced every set of supporting documents Stan had ever given him. He produced his own contemporaneous notes, in which he had written, more than once, that he believed certain expenses required additional documentation. He had asked. He had been ignored. He had not, by his own admission, ever pushed hard enough. By the spring of 2007, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Kentucky had assembled a 53-count indictment package: mail fraud, money laundering, 3 counts of filing false income tax returns. The case was presented to a federal grand jury in Louisville on a Thursday morning. The indictment was returned the same afternoon. The confrontation came at 7:42 in the morning on a Tuesday in April of 2007. Stan Curtis was at his kitchen table on Eastover Court, drinking coffee and reading the sports section of the Courier-Journal. He was 65 years old. He was wearing a navy cardigan over a white undershirt and a pair of corduroy slacks. Joanne was upstairs. 2 unmarked sedans pulled into the driveway. 4 agents in windbreakers stamped FBI walked to the front door. Special Agent Pruitt rang the bell once. Stan answered with the newspaper still in his hand. "Mr. Curtis, we have a federal grand jury indictment for your arrest. You will need to come with us." Stan did not say anything for several seconds. His eyes moved past Pruitt to the agents on the porch and then back to Pruitt's face. He set the newspaper down on the entryway table. The newspaper was folded to a column about the Cardinals' loss to Connecticut in the regional final. "Can I tell my wife?" "You can. I will come with you." Joanne was at the top of the stairs in her bathrobe. Stan did not climb up to her. He stood at the bottom of the staircase and said, in a voice low enough that the agents had to lean in to hear it, "Joanne, the FBI is here. They have a warrant for me. I need to go." Joanne did not scream. She did not cry. She came down the stairs slowly, holding the banister with both hands, and when she reached him, she put her palm on the side of his face. He closed his eyes. "How long have they known?" "A long time." "Did you do it?" He did not answer. He turned to Pruitt and held out his wrists. Those were the last words Stan Curtis spoke before invoking his right to counsel. He was processed at the federal courthouse on West Broadway by 9 that morning, fingerprinted by 10, and released on a $50,000 unsecured bond by noon. He drove himself home in his own car. The arrest is done. Sentencing is next. If a case like this makes your blood pressure spike, we cover one every single week on this channel. Hit subscribe so the next one finds you, and drop the word philanthropist in the comments if you have ever stopped donating to a charity because something about it felt off. I want to see how many of you have been there. The case did not go to trial. Stan Curtis retained a Louisville defense attorney named Robert Ashby, a former federal prosecutor who had handled white-collar cases in the Western District for 20 years. Ashby read the discovery and met with his client 3 times. After the 3rd meeting, he advised Stan to negotiate. The notebook alone, Ashby told him, was likely a 20-year case at trial. The cooperative accountant made it worse. The handwritten letters made it worse still. Trial was not a defense. Trial was a sentencing enhancement. On a Friday morning in September of 2007, Stan Curtis appeared in the courtroom of United States District Judge Eleanor Hatchett and pleaded guilty to 1 count of mail fraud, 1 count of money laundering, and 3 counts of filing false income tax returns. He admitted, under oath, to diverting $183,354 in USA Harvest charitable contributions to his personal use over a period of more than a decade. He admitted to failing to report more than $500,000 of income on his personal tax returns. He admitted that the diversions had been deliberate, that the tax misstatements had been knowing, and that he had structured the cash withdrawals specifically to evade federal currency reporting requirements. Sentencing took place 4 months later in the same courtroom. The U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Kentucky stood at the prosecution table and told the court that Stan Curtis had spent 15 years diverting donations meant for the neediest citizens of this country to a leather sectional, a country club membership, and the tuition at a private high school. The crime, he said, was not the dollar figure. The crime was the betrayal of every donor and every hungry family who had been promised that every dollar went to the work. Margaret Whitlow, the donor whose attorney's letter had started the entire investigation, addressed the court in a victim impact statement. She read for 4 minutes. She told the judge that her husband had spent 36 years as a school principal and that the $1,000 they had sent every November for 9 years had been money he had wanted to use for hungry children. She told the judge that she did not want her name attached to a charity that had stolen from her dead husband. She told the judge, with her voice level and her hands folded, that the worst part was not the money. The worst part was that her husband had died believing the food had been delivered. Judge Hatchett spoke for slightly less than 2 minutes before pronouncing sentence. Mr. Curtis, you spent 15 years standing at podiums in this city and telling people that every dollar they gave you went to the work. You told them that from this podium too, in a way, every time you signed an affidavit or filed a tax return, that this court was supposed to be able to rely on. You did not steal from a corporation. You did not steal from a bank. You stole from people who wrote $1,000 checks because they could not eat the food they wanted to give away themselves. The court is not interested in your reputation. The court is interested in the donors and in the hungry. They are who you robbed. She sentenced Stan Curtis to 24 months in federal prison, to be served at the federal prison camp at Manchester, Kentucky, followed by 3 years of supervised release. The court ordered restitution in the amount of $183,354, plus full payment of all back taxes, interest, and penalties owed to the Internal Revenue Service, a figure that exceeded $300,000 on its own. USA Harvest was dissolved by the Kentucky Attorney General's office within 90 days of the sentencing. The remaining chapter directors in 38 cities folded their operations or merged into local food banks. The Points of Light Foundation quietly removed Stanley Curtis from its honors list. The Catholic Archdiocese of Louisville rescinded its Lay Apostle of the Year award. The Courier-Journal ran a 1-column correction, noting that its 1996 Sunday profile had described Stan Curtis as the conscience of the city. Stan Curtis served 21 months at FPC Manchester and was released to a halfway house in Louisville in the summer of 2009. He was 67 years old. He returned home to Eastover Court. He never gave another speech. The regulators drew one lesson, and one lesson only, from the wreckage. No charity, no matter how small, no matter how saintly its founder, should ever permit a single individual to touch every part of the money. 2 signatures on every check. An independent board with real fiduciary power. An annual audit by an outside firm. Form 990s reviewed by someone other than the person who signs them. The reforms were not complicated. The reforms had always existed. USA Harvest had simply been built to avoid them. One man controlled all of it, and the man, for 15 years, had quietly fed himself first. This case was a quiet kind of theft. But the case on the right-hand side of your screen is louder, uglier, and impossible to look away from. Click it now.